Okay, now let's start the coloring. So for the iris, if you look at the reference photo, the blue isn't, you see that the eye color is a bit blue greenish, but the blue isn't that saturated. So for the blue, I'm going to use the Paynes Grey. This is a beautiful gray color with a touch of blue to it. So if you don't have the Paynes Grey, you can use one of the blues and then mix it with a gray color. Because if you look at the iris and you see the outer corner, that line, you see that it's a bit grayish. So blue, grayish, and green. The kneaded eraser, I'm going to lighten up the sketch first. You want your sketch to be really light, just so that, that only you can see it. Okay, so with the Paynes Grey, 30%, I'm going to go over the whole iris, and I'm going to leave that highlight white, and I'm using really light pressure. I'm going to use the French Grey and go over the side of the iris, still using light pressure. And you see that here you see a line of the iris, and here you don't really see that. So I'm shading this part because you see that it's a bit in shadow. Okay, so around the pupil you see that it's a bit green. For that I'm going to use the olive brown 50%, and I'm going to go around the pupil here. And maybe even the olive brown, the darkest green. Start with very light pressure, see if it isn't too dark. This is a very beautiful green color. It's an earthy green color. It's mixed a bit with, well, this is olive brown, so it's mixed with a bit of a brown. So with the Paynes Grey 60%, I'm going to start with the outline. And then the top part of the iris is usually darker because of the shadow coming from the eyelid. So I'm going to go over the top part. I'm using very light pressure. And then here you also, above the highlights, you see that it's darker. Very light pressure going over the outline. You don't want to darken that outline too much. So you can draw the iris with a lot of details or not. I'm just trying to draw what I see. Okay, so now I think the blue is too blue. So this is the olive brown 50%. I want to mix it a bit with that blue to make it look a bit more like that eye color. So a mix of green and blue. Now with the French Grey, darken this outline. I'm not using the Paynes Grey because it's too blue. So I'm using this one, the French Grey, because the outline looks a bit grayish. Now I'm going to use the black and go over the iris, the pupil, sorry. Darken it. And now with the light blue, the Paynes Grey 30%, I want to blend and bring back that lighter blue color. So now with the olive brown, add back that green. And then with the lightest, the olive brown 10%, this light green color, I'm going over the edge to blend. And you see that in the reference photo, you see that green, darker green. Towards the blue, you see a bit of that light green. And what I like about the luminance is that you can layer with the lighter colors over the darker colors. With the Paynes Grey 60%, the medium, and I'm going to go over this area and draw back those lines back in, because after you blend it will become all smoother, so then you will need to draw the details. So the French Grey 10%, You see that this area is darker because of the shadow. This one, this is the burnt sienna 50%. With the lighter one, the burnt sienna 10%. And you also see a bit of that pink in the eyeball you see here. And that blends in with the white. With the French Grey 30%, the medium one. Now with the dark sepia, the dark brown. Darken this shadow here, coming from the upper eyelid. That will make your eye look 3D if you create a shadow here on the eyeball and on the iris. And with the burnt sienna 50, darken. And then with the sepia, blend the edges of the pupil. And then with the black, go over the pupil again. So let's start coloring the skin of the eye, and I'm going to use the lightest burnt ochre. So let's start adding a light layer. Continue, I'm going to use the burnt sienna 50, and I'm going to go over my sketch a bit. And let's just add this color here as well for the shadow. Now we started with the burnt ochre 10%, so now with the burnt ochre 50%, the medium color, I'm going to look at my reference photo and see where you see a bit of that shadow, where it can be a bit darker. And still light pressure. You don't want to create a smooth finish yet. You just want to keep on building up your layers. And here you see a highlight under the eyebrow. So I'm going to color around that area. So maybe first with the sepia here for the darkest. So let's go over that with the burnt sienna. And you see a line now, but we're going to blend it with the rest. That's why I'm going over the crease line. So with the rest of the layers we can blend it a bit. Under the lashes it's a bit darker as well, so let's color this area. And now with the burnt ochre, the darkest one, I'm going to blend over the crease line here. And let's see, the shadow under the eyebrow is also a bit darker, so let's just color this whole area. Just keep on building up the layers with light pressure. But try not to start using more pressure to create a smoother finish. I know that will make it look better, but you don't have the correct color yet. So you want to keep on, you want to be able to add more layers until you have the correct color. And then we're going to go for a smoother finish. So if you have a very sharp tip, it's easier to go into that into the texture of the paper, and it will be easier to create a smoother result that way. And all of the materials I'm using are listed under the video if you're not sure what I'm using. So I'm just slowly adding this color, mixing it to make it look more like the skin tone I see in the reference photo. You see that once you blend, the crease line becomes a bit lighter, so we're going to go over that later again. Okay, so now with the burnt sienna 50, I'm going to go over this shadow here. So I'm actually going to go back to the brown ochre 50%, be a bit more warmer. Okay, now to add a bit of that pink color, if you look at the reference photo here, I like to use this pink color, the Anthraquinoid Pink. Just with a very light layer, because this is a very bright saturated pink. If you use it on its own, you can see here, but I like to add with a very light layer just a touch of that color. I like to add it to the skin. You see a bit of the cool shadow color, maybe even blue. I think I'm going to add a bit of the violet. This is the Ultramarine Violet, and let's see. you can just start to color a very light layer and just see how it turns out. I'm also adding it a bit up here. You'll need to look at each area and determine which color you see. Now with the lighter one, the brown ochre 10%, I'm going to go over this to blend and mix and start creating a smoother layer. I'm still using light to medium pressure. I don't want to burnish yet because I'm still not sure if I have the correct color everywhere. So I want to be able to layer some more if I need to. And I'm also going to go over this highlighted area. Here it's also a bit more pink. So with the burnt sienna 10%, go over the areas where you see that it's more pink, like here. With the burnt sienna again, bring back that color. And let's go over this area a bit, can darken it. And then with the burnt ochre, the darkest one, because the skin is a bit orange brown here. Or maybe first the burnt sienna 50% to create that, to blend that shadow a bit here. Make it look like it's a bit round. And here, this wrinkle here. And now with the burnt ochre, the darkest one, that orange brown to create that shadow here. So remember, the values need to be correct. You can't just look at the colors. You'll need to see if it's a dark. So the values are midtones, highlights and shadows. So you start with the midtones and then you continue layering to darken for the shadows. And then you add the highlights. And that will make your drawing look 3D. Burnt ochre, the lightest, if we might lighten it a bit too much. So first with the burnt ochre 50%, I'm going to go over this and here. And I still see, I don't think the violet shows enough. So maybe add a bit of, you see the Paynes Grey, the medium color, Paynes Grey 60, but I'm going to go really light to add a bit of that shadow. So really, really light pressure, just glaze this color over the layers that you have. Just add a touch of that blue to create that beautiful shadow color. Maybe even a bit here. Well, not too much. You don't want it to look like a bruise. So now I don't want it too orange brown. You see the orange brown color here, but then here it looks more like the brown ochre. So here I have the brown ochre 50% to blend over that blue we just put down. Light pressure, I'm still using light pressure. First I want to add the colors and mix the colors. And you remember that blue and yellow create green. So if you see kind of, you know, veins under our skin are like bluish greenish. You will need to look at the reference photo and see which tone you see. And it will make the skin tone look more interesting if you add a bit of the blue or violet or maybe green if you need to. So you see the more layers you have, the more smoother the layers look. Maybe with the white first. You see that highlight over here? Let's use the white. And if it's too bright, you can gently color over it a bit. So with the brown ochre 10%, the burnt sienna 10%, the lightest. Let's see. Also go over the highlight a bit. So I'm starting to use more medium pressure now to blend all of the layers together. You see how many layers go into a colored pencil drawing. With the buff titanium, see kind of a highlight over here. Okay, so now with the burnt ochre 10%, continue to blend and layer. I actually want to because it looks like it stops here. I want to add a bit more of that Paynes Grey 60 just to blend it more so it doesn't look like it stops over there. And now back with the burnt ochre 10% to blend. So now with the buff titanium, I'm going to go over this to create a smoother finish, but without darken it, without that it darkens too much. So that's when I use the buff titanium. And if it turns out too light, you can just go over it with the color again, but really light, because now you have smooth layers, so you will just need to glaze that color over it. Maybe with the brown ochre 50%, the medium, maybe with the darker brown ochre. Go over it, really light pressure, just glaze the color back over it. And with the burnt ochre 50%, so that it doesn't turn out too yellow brown. Add a bit of that orange brown back here. And then with the burnt ochre 10%, the lightest. Now I see that the white of the eyeball is a bit darker in shadow here on this side. So I have French Grey 30%, the middle French Grey. And I'm going to darken it a bit and really light, because you don't want to darken too much. So now let's go over this side with the buff titanium, because this side is a bit warmer here. And then for this side I'm going to use the white pencil, because if you look at the reference photo, you see that the highlight is white and the eyeball next to it isn't white at all. You see that value, how dark it actually is. With the burnt sienna 50%, I'm going to darken. And then with the burnt sienna 10%, blend it. It still looks strange without the eyelashes, but you need to try to look through that. Brown ochre 10%. I want to add a bit more of that yellow beige color and blend. So for the first layer, because if you look at the eyebrow, if you look through the hairs, then you do see skin tone, but then darker shadow. So I'm going to start with the medium burnt ochre. The burnt ochre 50%. The burnt ochre 10%, because I want to color this area as well. So now you're going to look through the eyebrow hairs and see which skin tone you see, which value. And with the burnt sienna 50%, let's see, darken even more with the burnt ochre. And then with the burnt ochre 50%, now with the burnt ochre 10%, go over the skin here, brown ochre 10%. With the sepia 50%, and I'm going to start drawing those hairs. Looking back at your reference photo and follow the direction that you see that the hair is going. So here they go up, and then here they go down. So now with the burnt ochre 10%, I think I'm going to blend this in between those hairs. Okay, now with the sepia, the darkest brown, start to darken, draw the darker hairs. Here the hairs are more together. And make sure your pencil tip is sharp enough, because with colored pencils it's important to have sharp pencils, especially for the details. You can compare it with the pupil. Some hairs in the eyebrow are just as black as the pupil. That's how I compare different areas in the reference photo and in my drawing as well. So if your eyebrow isn't dark enough, then it won't look good yet. So if you compare it in the reference photo to an area in your drawing and you see that you use black for the pupil, then you can also use black for the eyebrow hairs, because it will need to have the same value. So I just keep on going over the eyebrow until I have it thick enough. You don't want to see too much of the skin showing through. And you don't also want to see all of these individual hairs, but some of them are more together. And blend over some of the hairs here to make them look softer. I'm going to use the burnt sienna 10% here a bit for the highlight to make it less bright here and blend it more with the skin. And then with the buff titanium, blend and smoothen the layer. And with the burnt sienna, I'm going to go over the crease line here again. And then with the burnt ochre 50%, because you see around it that orange brown, just to blend. With the sepia, go over the eyebrows again, the eyebrow hairs. If you have practice with in the drawing course, also with portraits and facial features, then drawing eyebrows and eyelashes are actually the same, just with a colored pencil instead of with graphite. So you need to make sure the hairs, they taper at the end. So put some a bit messy, like here. Okay, let's move on to the eyelashes. I'm actually just going to use the black. So make sure you have a sharp pencil tip with the black, because I don't want to do too much layering. If I start with the sepia and then need to go over with the black, I might thicken the eyelash too much, and that's not what I want. So I usually start here, somewhere here, and then you see you want to draw it on the lash line, not here where it connects to the eyeball. And you see that it goes over the crease line. So you see that I go over the base, but not over the tip. And some overlap each other, and some curl a bit more. So don't draw them all the same. And I'm using light pressure here because these are thinner and a bit lighter. And this person is wearing mascara, so that's why I'm using the black. But if I'm going to draw natural lashes, then I would use the sepia, and then maybe to darken a bit of the black. Because the black, you see that it stands out a lot. Don't really like the black color. So I just go lash by lash, and I keep on looking at my reference photo. Here you see more of them together. And you see that it's thicker here. And here they overlap each other. So I'm looking at the height of the pupil, and then you see that it starts to go down a bit here. And I'm actually going to darken the iris here. And with the French Grey, go over the black here to blend it. See that these go down and over the highlight here. It's a bit strange to draw the eyelashes down, you know what I mean? But you really look at the reference photo and draw what you see. This is how we normally draw eyelashes. They go up and they curve up, but then here they curve, some of them are going down. So if you see that in the reference photo, then draw it too, because that will make it look more realistic. And then here you see it curls up, some of them, and this way. So here they start to curve up a bit. And then for the lower lashes, here they're more clumped together. And then here below the pupil you see kind of a space in between them. So leave that space. Actually, the buff titanium, I drew them too close to each other. So I just go over that area. So here the lower lashes, they have some space in between some of them, so also draw it like that. And they don't have to be all exactly the same. Just pay attention to the direction. If you see a space in between them, do it, because otherwise you have too much lower lashes. Now remember that you don't draw the eyelashes connecting to the eyeball. Leave that space for the waterline. And with the brown ochre 10%. So now what you're going to do is step away from your drawing, take a break. And also with the black, I'm going to go over some areas because I don't want the eyelashes to stand out too much. And I might go over the eyelashes. I'm not sure yet. I think they stand out too much now. I don't like how that looks. That's why I don't usually use the black. I use the dark sepia for that. But because she has mascara, I did want to draw the eyelashes dark. And then with the sepia, go over some of them. So I'm going to go over the eyelashes with the sepia. Very carefully, just go over the base, not over the tips, because you don't want to ruin that and thicken the tips. Okay, so it's important to take a break so that you come back with fresh eyes and then look at your drawing, maybe from a different angle. Just look at it and see if you're satisfied. So now let's draw this highlight on the waterline. And it goes a bit over the iris here. You can go over this highlight if you need to. And with the sepia, I'm going to darken this line a bit more so it stands out. You see that? And it's darker. Okay, so once the paint is dry, you can go over the edges if you need to. And I see that I can even darken, you see, compared to that bright highlight, this is the French Grey 30%. The white of the eyeball is even darker in shadow. So I'm going to darken it a bit. And you see that when you only had the iris and the eyeball, then the eyeball looked dark enough. But once you continue and add the rest, you see that it isn't dark enough at all. And with the French Grey 10%, going to blend it instead of the white, otherwise it might lighten up too much. And now you see I went a bit over that highlight, so I'm going to add it back later on. You see, once the paint is dry, you can easily just go over it. So now with the sepia, I'm going to go over, very carefully go over the edges of some of the, because I shaded the eyeball really carefully. You don't want to darken or thicken them too much. And then with the French Grey 30%, once the paint is dry, if you look closely at the reference photo, you see that the highlight isn't just one straight line. You see that here is a bit, that it stops there. So if you go over the edges a bit, you will blend it in.